show humanity. Good cop, is that just a fantasy?
Is having good cops really just a fantasy? Let's hope not. Sadly though, the number of bad cops is much higher than the number of good cops, if there are still any. Well, hopefully. Sadly, this is what we've come to now, that we can never be sure if the people who swore to serve and protect us are actually doing that. It's even more disheartening that instead of feeling safe in the presence of men in uniform, we experience fear. So hats off, hands down, and salute to the good cops out there. May you go forth and multiply. The sad truth about today's society, though, is that instead of good cops multiplying in rapid succession, bad cops do. And it's been happening for decades. It may have happened several decades ago, but it will still make your blood boil, just like what happened in case number 1. Case 1. California versus Powell et al., 1992. In 1991, 4 upstanding police officers were thrust into the limelight as a video of them beating someone rose to fame like flames. What brought this on? In March 1991, robbery parole and taxi driver Rodney King led police officers in a high-speed pursuit through the North Los Angeles suburbs. The chase began after King was caught speeding in a freeway but refused to pull over. When King finally stopped his car 7.8 miles later at Hanson Dam Park, several police cars approached his vehicle. A group of LAPD officers led by Sergeant Stacy Coon ordered King and his 2 companions to exit the car and lie on the ground. However, King followed the order slowly, getting on his hands and knees rather than lying flat, while his friends promptly complied. Because of this reluctance to follow orders, officers Lawrence Powell, Timothy Wind, Ted Brasino, and Roland Solano tried to force King down, but he resisted. At this point, the officers stepped back and shot King twice with a taser, like it was the only thing they could have done. Fortunately, at the time, George Holliday, a civilian living in an apartment complex across the street, was standing on a balcony and accidentally focused the lens of his new camera on the commotion unfolding right in front of him. When the video was released to the public, the city was in utter shock. It was one of the first police brutality videos of its kind, and one of the first videos of anti-black police violence to go viral. Long before Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, it was a graphic video of the attack that was broadcasted internationally. What's more shocking than the video itself were the events that followed. When a state trial against the officers for the excessive use of force resulted in acquittals, riots throughout the country ensued, which left at least 54 people dead and caused nearly $1 billion in property damage. There was ocular proof of what happened. It seemed compelling, criminal justice and law professor Jody David R. Moore said, referring to the videotape. And yet, we saw a verdict that told us we couldn't trust our lying eyes, right? Fortunately, the officers were tried in federal court for civil rights violations, although only 2 of the officers were found guilty. Now listen to this. I kept reminding myself to stay cool, but it was as if I was some damn human piñata, and the cops were in a rush to see who could smash me open first. That was how Rodney King described his beating. Those so-called officers are trash. What's worse than the beating Rodney King received, though, was when police brutality turned into murder, just like it happened in Case 2. California versus Iverson, 1995. In July 1992, an unarmed black tow truck driver was fatally shot by a white police officer. At the time, 2 motorcycle officers approached the tow truck driver at a gas station to check his tow truck, which was not properly registered according to the police report. A police statement said that John Daniels became distressed when he was asked about the registration, and when asked for his driver's license, he entered the truck and resisted when the police officers tried to pull him from his truck. It was then that Officer Douglas Iverson shot Daniels as he feared Daniels would run into pedestrians directly in the truck's path. However, witnesses said they saw none, and the van was traveling at less than 5 miles per hour. But as always, they consider witnesses liars if their statements don't work in their favor. Then Deputy District Attorney Kathy Mader said Iverson shot Daniels once, but the bullet hit him in the upper arm and penetrated his chest. Mader further stated, "You don't kill an unarmed motorist to prevent a traffic accident." Then District Attorney Gil Garcetti said, "We'd expect officers to do the job they're sworn to do. When you go over the line, you will be prosecuted." Oh, louder. In 1993, Douglas Iverson was charged with murder in the shooting death of John Daniels. A generic charge of murder was initially filed, but Iverson was tried for second-degree murder, as prosecutors said they will pursue second-degree murder charges against Officer Douglas Iverson instead of first-degree murder because the shooting was not premeditated. However, in 1994, the hearing ended in what many saw as a mistrial, as 9 of the jury wanted to convict Iverson of only involuntary manslaughter rather than second-degree murder as charged. In 1995, then-Judge Charles E. Horan rejected the district attorney's request to prosecute Iverson for a third time, and, in a lengthy ruling, dismissed all charges against the police officer. I don't know about you, but this case left a bitter taste in my mouth, and that's just for a single bullet that killed a man. Now, imagine how I feel when dozens and dozens of bullets were shot, because that's exactly what happened in case number 3, New York versus Boss et al., 2000. Before I dig deeper into this case, let me just say this: 41 shots were fired at an unarmed man. Let that sink in. Sometime in 1999, Amadou Diallo, an immigrant from Guinea, stood on the stoop of his building in the Bronx and was mistakenly identified as a serial rapist by 4 officers: Kenneth Boss, Sean Carroll, Edward McMillan, and Richard Murphy. The 4, dressed as civilians, shouted at Diallo to show his hands, but Diallo reached into his pocket instead, pulling out his wallet as he attempted to run for the safety of his building. Carroll then shouted to his fellow officers that Diallo had a gun and began firing at him. The officers later claimed that they warned Diallo before opening fire on him. However, a witness testified that they did not give warning before firing at him 41 times, and that many of the shots were fired after he had already fallen to the ground. 19 shots hit Diallo, who died within minutes. 41 freaking shots. If you're not angered by this, well, you should. Rightfully so, in the same year, the 4 officers were charged with murder for killing Diallo in a hail of 41 bullets, which led to months of protests. However, officers Kenneth Boss, Sean Carroll, Edward McMillan, and Richard Murphy pleaded innocent in a Bronx courtroom to second-degree murder. The audacity! In 2000, the 4 officers were acquitted of criminal charges. In 2001, the Justice Department declined to pursue a civil rights case against them. Not long after that, news broke that the 4 police officers will not receive departmental punishment for the shooting, but will undergo retraining in tactics and firearms use. Then New York Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik accepted the recommendations of 2 police investigative panels, concluding that the officers acted within departmental guidelines when they gunned down Amadou Diallo in February 1999. The panel said that the officers believed their lives were in danger because they thought Diallo had a gun. I mean, what? The 22-year-old had been holding his wallet, for God's sake. Of course, this wasn't the first and definitely not the last time cops exhibited violence to people of color. Yes, just like it happened in the next case, but before that, make sure to subscribe before I become violent. But of course, I'm kidding. Anyway, going back to case number 4, Wisconsin versus Masaryk et al., 2006. In October 2004, Frank Jude Jr., a biracial man who only wanted to attend a housewarming party with his friends, suffered a brutal beating on a street in Milwaukee's Bayview neighborhood. According to his attorney, Frank was surrounded by a dozen men. He was kicked repeatedly in the head, stripped naked, and threatened with a knife. While authorities knew right away the people involved, no one has been charged or even arrested for more than 3 months. What? Why? Because they were off-duty Milwaukee police officers, that's why. They even claimed that Jude stole one of their badges, so they had to subdue him because he fought against them. However, witnesses told a different story. Jude didn't steal anything and didn't even resist. However, the defendants claimed that witnesses at the party were unreliable. You see, because witnesses are nothing but liars. Please note my sarcasm. In 2007, Jude submitted a statement to the court stating that Bartlett was the ringleader in the attack, wherein he feared for his life. "You and your fellow police officer friends attempted to kill me and take my life," he wrote. "Mr. Bartlett, you are a disgrace to all police officers and every public official in the world." Well, if that ain't the truth. In November of that year, 3 of these officers were sentenced to long prison terms. A judge sentenced John Bartlett to 17 years and 4 months. Daniel Masaryk was sentenced to 15 years and 8 months, and Andrew Spangler received the same sentence. Each of the 3 was also sentenced to 3 years of supervision and ordered to pay $16,365 in restitution, as they should. Do you think that's enough? Speaking of which, do you know what isn't enough? A life sentence for these criminals.